600,000 years ago, a moment occurred that would forever change the trajectory of life on Earth. It wasn't marked by celebration or ceremony because the participants couldn't have imagined the significance of what they were about to do. A small band of Homo heidelbergensis, our direct ancestors, stood at the edge of an African plain watching a pride of lions tear apart a massive buffalo. For countless generations, their kind had waited in the shadows for exactly this moment, when the apex predators would finally leave enough scraps behind to justify the deadly risk of approaching a kill site. But this time was different. This time, instead of waiting for the lions to finish and hoping for leftovers, they made a decision that would transform humanity from cowering scavengers into the most feared predators the planet had ever known. The group consisted of roughly 30 individuals, men and women whose brains had evolved just enough beyond their predecessors to conceive of something that no other species had ever attempted.
Yes, we will
Actively
get the beast.
challenging
We will
apex
succeed.
predators for their kills, not through brute force but through intelligence, coordination and strategic thinking that would revolutionize the very concept of hunting. The scene was terrifying in its implications. These early humans stood barely 5.5 feet tall, possessed no natural weapons, no armor-like skin, no crushing bite force or ripping claws. They were physically inferior to every major predator on the African continent. Lions could kill them with a single swipe. Hyenas could crush their bones effortlessly. Even the buffalo they intended to claim could trample them into paste without breaking stride. Yet something in their enlarged brains had developed a capacity that would prove more powerful than any physical weapon. The ability to think beyond the immediate moment, to plan coordinated actions, and to use environmental factors as force, multipliers that could overcome any physical disadvantage. The transformation from scavenger to predator didn't happen overnight. For millions of years, human ancestors had survived by being opportunistic feeders who took advantage of situations created by other predators. They would follow vultures to carcasses, wait for carnivores to abandon kills, and risk quick dashes to grab whatever meat they could carry before more dangerous creatures returned. This lifestyle required intelligence, timing, and courage, but it was fundamentally reactive. Humans responded to opportunities created by others rather than creating opportunities themselves. The shift to active predation required a cognitive leap that seems almost impossible when you consider the physical disadvantages involved. These early humans had to develop the mental capacity to visualize complex scenarios that hadn't yet occurred, coordinate the actions of multiple individuals toward a common goal, and maintain focus on
Move to
long-term
position 3.
objectives despite
that.
immediate dangers. That could kill them at any moment. They had to overcome millions of years of evolutionary
this looks
programming
good.
that screamed
set
at them
up
to
right
run
here.
from large predators, not challenge them directly. The first organized hunting attempts were crude and often deadly. Failures. Early humans learned through trial and error that direct confrontation with apex predators was suicide. But they also discovered that predators had behavioral patterns that could be exploited through careful observation and timing. Lions were vulnerable during the hottest part of the day when they sought shade and became sluggish. Hyenas could be confused and scattered through coordinated noise-making and aggressive displays from multiple directions simultaneously. The breakthrough came when these early humans realized that they possessed something no other predator had: the ability to maintain coordinated group action over extended periods while adapting their strategy based on changing circumstances. A pride of lions might work together to bring down prey, but once the kill was made, competition between individuals took over. Hyena packs were efficient, but followed rigid behavioral patterns that could be predicted and countered. Human hunting groups could maintain cooperation throughout the entire process, from initial planning to final meat distribution, while adapting their tactics in real time based on unexpected developments. The weapons that enabled this transition were remarkably simple, but represented revolutionary thinking about how tools could extend human capabilities. Sharpened sticks became spears that could inflict wounds from a safe distance. Rocks became projectiles that could be thrown with accuracy, developed through countless hours of practice. Fire became a weapon for controlling animal movement and creating fear in creatures that had never encountered it before. But the most important weapon was coordination itself. the ability to execute complex group maneuvers that confused and overwhelmed prey animals that had evolved defenses against individual predators, but had no evolutionary preparation for coordinated attacks by intelligent hunters.
Yes, Elder.
The social implications of this transition were equally revolutionary. Successful hunting required unprecedented levels of trust and cooperation between individuals who had to risk their lives based on the actions of others. This created the first human societies based on mutual dependence rather than simple family groupings or hierarchical dominant structures. Hunters had to develop methods for planning complex operations, assigning roles based on individual skills, and sharing resources according to contribution and need rather than pure physical dominance. The mammoth stood 15 feet tall at the shoulder and weighed 8 tons, a moving mountain of muscle, bone, and ivory that could crush a human being without even noticing. Its tusks were longer than a man was tall, curved weapons, capable of impaling multiple attackers with a single swing of its massive head. Yet 30 early humans crouched in the tall grass, watching this impossible target, not with the resignation of creatures accepting their place in the food chain, but with the calculating eyes of apex predators, planning an execution that would feed their entire tribe for months. This was no desperate attempt at scavenging or opportunistic feeding. This was warfare conducted with intelligence, patience, and tactical sophistication that would have impressed modern military strategists. The hunt began not hours but weeks before the actual attack, with scouts tracking mammoth herds across hundreds of miles of African terrain, learning their migration patterns, feeding habits, and behavioral responses to different environmental conditions. These reconnaissance missions required individuals to follow dangerous megafauna for days at a time, memorizing details about herd composition, identifying which animals showed signs of age or injury that might make them vulnerable, and mapping the terrain where an attack might be possible. The weapons they carried represented revolutionary advances in human technology that multiplied their killing power exponentially. Wooden spears had been hardened in fire until their points were nearly as sharp as modern metal, then attached to perfectly balanced shafts that could be thrown with deadly accuracy at distances up to 50 feet. Each hunter carried multiple spears of different lengths and weights, specialized for different phases of the attack. Light javelins for initial strikes from maximum distance, heavy thrusting spears for close combat, and backup weapons in case the primary attack failed. But spears were just one component of an arsenal that included carefully selected stones, shaped and weighted for maximum impact, firebrands that could control animal movement through fear, and primitive nets woven from plant fibers that could entangle legs and restrict movement during crucial moments of the hunt. The tactical planning required for a mammoth hunt resembled a military campaign more than simple predation. The hunting party was organized into specialized units, each with specific roles and responsibilities that had been practiced and refined through numerous smaller hunts. Trackers maintained surveillance on the target herd and identified the optimal moment for attack based on environmental conditions, animal behavior, and tactical advantages. Drivers were responsible for maneuvering the herd into predetermined kill zones where environmental features could be used to restrict escape routes and maximize the effectiveness of weapons. Attackers formed the primary strike force that would deliver the killing blows, while support hunters provided backup, retrieved weapons, and protected the primary attackers from other herd members who might attempt to defend the target animal. The neurological changes that occurred during this transition are still visible in modern human brains. The prefrontal cortex regions responsible for planning, abstract thinking, and impulse control expanded dramatically during the period when organized hunting emerged, creating cognitive capabilities that far exceeded what was necessary for simple survival. Modern humans can contemplate hypothetical scenarios, plan complex projects years into the future, and coordinate the actions of millions of individuals toward common goals because their brains were shaped by the demands of organizing mammoth hunts 600,000 years ago. The transformation to apex predator status also created the first human cultures based on shared knowledge, learned techniques, and collective memory that could be transmitted across generations. Successful hunting strategies were preserved and refined through storytelling, demonstration, and practice, that created cultural continuity extending far beyond individual lifespans. Children learned not just through instinct and observation, but through formal instruction in weapon crafting, animal behavior, tactical coordination, and psychological preparation for the violence required to kill large prey. This cultural transmission created the first human traditions, the first educational systems, and the first preservation of knowledge that would eventually become science, philosophy, and art. Perhaps most significantly, the transition to apex predator created the psychological foundation for human dominance over the natural world. Once early humans learned that intelligence and coordination could overcome any physical disadvantage, they began viewing themselves not as part of the natural ecosystem, but as controllers of it. This psychological shift from integration with nature to dominance over nature created the mindset that would eventually lead humans to reshape entire continents, eliminate competing species, and transform the planet's climate through their activities. The same mental processes that enabled 30 humans to kill an 8-ton mammoth would eventually enable human societies to build cities that housed millions of people, develop technologies that could destroy entire ecosystems, and create civilizations that consumed resources on a scale that dwarfed any previous biological impact on Earth. Every human alive today carries the genetic, neurological, and psychological legacy of those first organized hunters who dared to challenge creatures vastly more powerful than themselves and won through intelligence, coordination, and strategic thinking. The boardroom meetings where corporate strategies are planned, the military operations that coordinate thousands of soldiers, the scientific projects that require decades of collaborative research, all trace their origins to those first hunting. Parties who learned that humans working together could accomplish impossible goals through careful planning, specialized roles, and flawless execution of complex strategies. The kill zone had been selected weeks in advance, based on multiple tactical considerations that demonstrated unprecedented strategic thinking. The site was located near a steep ravine that could prevent escape in one direction, while thick forest on the opposite side would slow any charging animals and provide cover for hunters. Wind patterns had been studied to ensure that human scent wouldn't alert the prey until the attack was already underway. Water sources were nearby to attract the herd naturally without requiring dangerous driving maneuvers that might scatter the animals before the optimal moment arrived. The actual attack was a masterpiece of timing and coordination that required split-second decision-making by dozens of individuals acting in perfect synchronization. The assault began before dawn, with drivers positioning themselves to gradually guide the herd toward the kill zone using controlled fires and noisemakers that created psychological pressure without triggering immediate panic. This phase required hours of patient maneuvering, with drivers communicating through hand signals and bird calls to maintain coordination while remaining invisible to their prey. As the herd entered the predetermined zone, the primary attack commenced with a coordinated spear barrage from multiple directions simultaneously. The initial strikes were aimed not to kill immediately, but to wound and slow the target animal, while creating confusion that prevented effective escape. Hunters had studied mammoth anatomy extensively, learning that strikes to specific locations on the legs could cripple mobility while avoiding the heavily muscled areas that could deflect weapons without causing significant damage. The wounded, mammoths' attempts to flee were channeled by additional hunters, positioned to block escape routes and drive the animal deeper into the kill zone, where environmental features prevented effective evasion. The killing phase demonstrated the most sophisticated aspects of early human hunting strategy. Rather than attempting to deliver a single fatal blow, hunters employed persistence tactics that gradually wore down their massive prey through blood, loss, exhaustion, and psychological stress. Teams of hunters would approach from different angles, delivering strikes, then retreating before the wounded animal could retaliate, maintaining constant pressure that prevented recovery while avoiding the devastating counterattacks that could kill multiple hunters instantly. This phase could last for hours, requiring endurance, courage, and flawless coordination as hunters maintained their assault despite the terrifying sight of an enraged 8-ton predator fighting for its life. The final kill required hunters to overcome millions of years of evolutionary programming that warned them against approaching large, dangerous animals. Working in coordinated pairs, hunters would approach the exhausted mammoth and deliver precise spear thrusts to vital organs, timing their attacks to coincide with the animal's movements to avoid devastating defensive strikes. The moment of death was followed immediately by systematic butchering that had been planned as carefully as the hunt itself, with specific individuals assigned to different tasks that would preserve the maximum amount of meat and materials before scavengers arrived to challenge the kill. The moment that mammoth fell, something far more significant than a successful hunt had occurred. In learning to kill creatures 10 times their size through intelligence and coordination, early humans had fundamentally altered their own evolution in ways that would reshape every aspect of what it means to be human. The transformation from scavenger to apex predator didn't just change their diet. It rewired their brains, restructured their societies, and created the psychological foundations that would eventually build every human civilization that followed. The cognitive demands of organized hunting drove human brain evolution at an unprecedented rate, creating neural pathways and mental capacities that had never existed in any previous species. Planning a mammoth hunt required the ability to visualize complex scenarios weeks into the future, coordinate the actions of dozens of individuals toward a common goal, and maintain focus on abstract objectives despite immediate physical dangers that triggered every survival instinct to flee. This level of abstract thinking, future planning, and delayed gratification created the cognitive architecture that would eventually enable humans to build cities, develop mathematics, and contemplate the nature of existence itself. Language evolved from simple warning calls and basic gestures into sophisticated communication systems capable of transmitting complex tactical information, emotional states, and abstract concepts that had no physical reference. Hunters needed vocabulary for describing animal behavior patterns they had observed days earlier, coordinating timing for attacks that wouldn't occur for hours, and explaining weapon techniques to individuals who hadn't yet mastered the skills. This linguistic complexity required grammatical structures, symbolic thinking, and the ability to use sounds and gestures to represent ideas that existed only in imagination. Every human language that exists today carries the genetic legacy of those early hunting conversations where precise communication meant the difference between a successful kill and catastrophic failure that could starve the entire tribe. The social implications were equally revolutionary. Successful hunting created the first human societies based on meritocracy rather than simple physical dominance or family relationships. The most skilled tracker earned leadership roles regardless of age or size. The most accurate spear thrower received the choicest portions of meat regardless of social status. The most innovative tactical thinker gained influence based on results rather than intimidation. This created unprecedented social mobility and incentivized the development of specialized skills that contributed to group survival. Hunting also created the first economic systems based on delayed gratification and resource allocation that extended far beyond immediate consumption. A single mammoth kill provided enough meat to feed 30 people for months, but preserving and distributing that bounty required complex social agreements about who received what portions based on their contribution to the hunt, their families' needs, and their roles in future hunting expeditions. This created the first contracts, the first property rights, and the first systems of social obligation that formed the foundation of every economic system humans would ever develop. The psychological changes were perhaps the most profound and lasting. Learning to kill large, dangerous animals required early humans to overcome millions of years of evolutionary programming that warned them to flee from threatening situations. They had to develop the mental ability to suppress immediate fear responses in favor of long-term strategic thinking, maintain aggressive focus during terrifying encounters with enraged megafauna, and psychologically process the act of deliberately ending life for survival purposes. These psychological adaptations created the human capacity for warfare, conquest, and the systematic violence that would characterize much of human history. But they also created the mental resilience, strategic thinking and goal-directed behavior that enabled every human achievement from agriculture to space exploration.